Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Hi, everyone. Kind of a different show for you today. Usually we're pretty newsy and political, but as many of you know, I spent my life, or most of it, in the broadcasting business, primarily in radio. Well, 2 days ago was National Radio Day. It's meant to celebrate the medium, which is a bit difficult these days because it appears to be fading from view. Radio, I mean. I thought I'd get an expert on to chat about radio and about other media that have emerged, often to radio's detriment. If you want to hear about what media are top choices of younger people and also of older people, then you want to listen to what Lee Abrams has to say. Lee is someone I know, but also a guy I knew of going back to the 70s when he was the go-to person in radio because he had taken the lead in moving FM radio stations off old-style elevator music and constructed a new model that played rock music presented by younger hosts using formalized playlists. The format was called Album-Oriented Rock, or AOR. The model worked, and it spawned more change in FM particularly, much to AM's detriment. Lee introduced the idea of using psychographics to program stations, and what that fancy word means is he connected lifestyles to listening habits, which was pretty revolutionary at the time. It didn't stop there. Lee Abrams co-founded XM Radio. That's the XM in Sirius XM, which many of us use today. He's consulted for about 1,000 radio stations in his life and for ABC in the United States because, hey, he's an American. He's from Chicago. Lee also assisted in launching MTV, so if video killed the radio star, you can blame him. Anyway, we'll ask Lee about the media of the past and what has become of it, but Lee is not stopping anytime soon, so we'll also be talking about what to expect in the future. Back in one moment with Lee Abrams.
You're with the Sherman Report, daily news commentary available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with video posted on YouTube and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
So I've just provided you with a glowing history of Lee Abrams. I should say that when I first met him, I was running an FM station that needed fixing, and I anxiously attended talks that Lee was giving to broadcasters like me at radio conventions. It helped me because, hey, we carefully programmed and we became very successful, and that was in Montreal. Now I'd like to welcome Lee. So Lee Abrams, welcome to the Sherman Report. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Glad to be here.
Okay. Last week, people in Southern Ontario being Toronto and the environs within, say, 50 or 100 miles of it, were pretty shocked by an announcement that a heritage AM radio station called CHML, Hamilton, it's a 50 kilowatter, was calling it quits and turning off after 97 years. And by the time I saw the announcement online, CHML was no more, which was pretty amazing to me. It wasn't the first, it won't be the last. And in America, you've got plenty of examples of the same thing. They can't make a living anymore. In New York, the legendary news station WCBS 880, which everybody on the continent has probably tuned into one time or another, called it quits and flipped formats. What's going on with radio?
Well, I think it's in a terrible situation right now on several levels. Financially, the big companies in America, particularly that own radio stations, are going bankrupt. Either they are or on the verge of. So they have tremendous financial issues right now. They spend a lot of money on these stations and having trouble paying the bank. But equally, I think, of importance is the fact that radio is on creative steroids at a time when they should be, radio should be on creative steroids at a time when they're not, because you look around and there's so much competition to terrestrial radio, from streaming to satellites and new technologies that I'm sure will emerge. And you'd think that radio collectively would just be just at its peak creatively, new ideas, new angles, new ways of doing things. And they're stuck using a 1980s playbook. I mean, nothing's really, the world has changed, but if you listen to radio tapes from 70s and 80s and compare them to today, it's the same thing.
It's not that different. The jingles have changed and stuff like that, but there's still a guy on the hour doing news or a gal There's still a jock who's he might be playing records from a computer instead of a turntable, but there's still records and there's still music, and if you like it, that's fine. But these days, people can program their own music.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest problem for radio, particularly on the younger end, is streaming. Because, I mean, Apple Music or Spotify, it's a music lover's dream. There's no commercials. You can pick your playlist. You can hear songs from library of tens of millions. And then comes radio, which has, way too many commercials, limited playlists, and just very little excitement. So that's another key factor.
All right. So I'm going back about, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months. And I was reading announcements to the effect in the business pages to the effect that American car manufacturers and non local car manufacturers, Japanese, Korean, and so forth, were contemplating not bothering to equip cars with AM anymore. And some weren't going to equip cars with radios at all. Some of them walked it back. Some of them didn't. Does it matter?
Well, the car is obviously ground zero for radio listenership, so it does matter. I mean, that's a real kick in the butt for them. But on the other hand, there's so many other options that crowd the dashboard. I can see how radio would be last man out. I think part of the problem is the perception of radio as just a tired old medium in a time when everything's going digital. And radio's done a very poor job of reacting to that. They tend to be in denial.
For us old guys, I mean, we are old guys now. It's a pity. Is there any kind of a future? In other words, I guess, is there a 20-year-old Lee Abrams or Peter Sherman around who have an idea that could resurrect AM radio? AM radio.
Well, I don't think so. I think a lot of the smarter people out there aren't getting into radio. They're getting into other areas of entertainment. And so there is a talent glut, and really haven't seen a new real programming star emerge in 20 years. Whereas back in the golden age of competitive radio, the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, there would be new people emerging all the time with the next new idea. And you just don't see that anymore. Again, the eye is off the creative ball. People just aren't thinking about programming. They're thinking about how to stay in business or just going through the motions. And again, programming like they did 20 years ago because it worked then, or 30 years ago.
So I'm getting from what you're saying that it's may not be AM, but even for FM, the future is limited. I mean, there are AM stations that broadcast on the so-called HD sub-channels, the high-definition channels, and I sometimes listen to talk radio from where I live, Toronto, but I only ever listen on the HDs because it sounds better. It sounds like a studio. But I don't think a lot of people even know about what HD is. And FM for music, from what I can see looking at numbers such as they are that are published, it looks like if you want to reach, I don't know, 50-plus-year-old women primarily, some men as well, yeah, you can get them on middle of the road, what today is middle of the road, FM radio. But under 50, I don't think there are very many people listening to radio at all.
Well, they are, but they listen as a utility. What radio has lost is its fan base. There's a lot of users still, but excuse me, you have very few fans.
What's the difference between a user and a fan? What a fan of radio is me when I was a kid and I loved hearing the new Beatles song and listened to my favorite station. And today that doesn't exist at all.
Yeah,
so I might listen because I want the time or the traffic.
Yeah, a fan will wear the merchandise, put a sticker on their car, talk about the station, be an ambassador for the station, and that spreads. And you don't see that as much anymore. I do think there's a good future, at least in the short term, for 50-plus formats beyond middle of the road. I think there's, because, you look at the typical rock fan today, and they're 60 and over. So I think
it's us.
There could be new rock formats and new other music formats focused on 50-plus, and I think that'll be effective. On the younger side, again, it's tough. I remember when we started XM, we did a lot of research, and this was years ago. This is to beginning of 2000 or so, and we asked people, here it is at that time, 100 commercial-free channels, all these different formats, all these different choices. Would you pay $10 a month for it? Really over 30, over 40 people. Oh yeah, hell yeah! It sounds like it's bringing back the golden age of radio. Will you have things like this and this? Oh yeah, oh great. You talk to younger people, and they would say, "Pay for it? Why would I pay for something that sucks?" So what do you mean? So well, radio kind of stinks. I don't listen to radio if I don't have to, and why would I pay for it? And as much explaining as you tried to do, they still had that negative perception about radio. But I think, again, 50 plus, there's some opportunity there still.
So what you're telling us, because we all have to die sometime, is that if they create specific formats, like the music of your life, which was a format way back when
Right.
for people over 50, if you did that now, you'd get the 50 pluses, but you'd be with them till death, and that would be the end of your format and the end of your station.
Well, I think at least it keeps things alive for the next 10 years or so. And there are
That's
some
it.
stations doing some interesting things, 50 plus. There's one station in Phoenix and also one here in Chicago. And what they're doing is very little personality. They're all about deep playlists. They're oldies stations, but they play, instead of 150 songs, play thousands. And there's a big, oh, wow factor. Wow, I haven't heard that in years. Turn it up. And whereas traditional oldie stations play the same records over and over again. This is one example of a format that is working 50 plus, and I think there will be more of them.
Okay, so let's kind of move forward. The internet, of course, was the big line that changed everything when we crossed it. We can listen to whatever we want, wherever it comes from, whenever we want to. We can stop and start. If we're listening to podcasts, and this program becomes a podcast after we're live video, like now. So somebody who doesn't make it between 5 and 5:30 can listen tomorrow. And if she or he has 15 minutes to listen, go 15 minutes, stop it, and pick it up when you get back in the car. So it suits our own schedules. I can't see a way back for what we used to call the mass media in general. Can you?
No, I think we're definitely in the era of niche. It used to be television, such a great example. It used to be, at least in Chicago, 4 stations, 3 networks, and an independent, maybe 5, and an educational one. And now, there's thousands of stations. And I think that reflects across media that we're in the era of niche programming. So
niche programming, we might call it self-programming, I suppose, because it's a niche for whatever you define for yourself. And if we're self-programming, it strikes me that I don't have to ask you what the future brings. We're in the future. This is the future, and we're not going back. Right. This is actually one of the most exciting times in media history, because there's so much opportunity. It's the new Wild West. The old companies aren't necessarily where the magic is happening. There are new companies emerging, new sounds, new styles, and I think it reminds me of the late 60s in many respects, where there was such upheaval back then, but what came out of it was a lot of new ideas. And I see that same thing happening now, because we're certainly in an era of upheaval, but that usually can present some opportunities for some really stunning new ideas, which is what... Well, there seem to be new ideas all the time. Let me just focus on something that's happening right now. Matter of fact, I can focus on Chicago, where you're sitting. Canadians pay a lot of attention to American politics. I think you know that. And since you're the big guys and we share a continent, that's always been so, probably always will be. But in watching, for example, the Democratic Convention in Chicago, I can tune to any of the so-called main American networks like ABC, CBS, NBC, and then I can go to the targeted news stations, whether it's Fox or MSNBC. They're all carrying the same thing, the same speeches, but the commentary is different because of the slant the individuals have. But if I take a look at that, the format that they present is all the same. They're all in little tiny studio booths in the convention center. They feature each of those networks or stations, news stations, star reporters. They're saying the same thing from their own particular viewpoint. And so I asked the question, is TV suffering from the same thing? Is mainstream television dying?
Oh, yeah, I think, again, like radio, I don't think it's going to die overnight, but there's a trend that is clearly in decline. And it's interesting with the convention here, the most response I've been seeing is from the TikTok reporters who have certain ones have access to the convention. And they're presenting far more interesting presentation of the events than the networks are. And as you
Well,
say,
it's kind of fun to, I mean, I have to say, I watch TikTok stuff. You watch TikTok stuff, and it's not really designed for us. It's the kind of stuff that we first saw when our kids showed it to us. Not my kids, because they're 40 something, but younger kids. And then we got onto the fact that, hey, there's a TikTok and there's some pretty creative people on there. And you can do it like this program individually. So I think of kids, and I'm not going to belabor the point of American television, American networks fading. We can see that because 25 years ago we were watching NYPD Blue or ER, and then later on things like Blue Bloods. The only franchise that's a serial type of enterprise that's a program is the whole Law and Order franchise. It's the only one left because that stuff costs 15 million, 20 million an hour to produce, and it still gets enough audience on mainstream television to be valid. But the rest of it's made way for generally America's Got Talent, The Voice, those kinds of reality shows. I'm not saying they're bad shows. I'm saying they've had to find ways to cut corners on budget. So the programming that I've been mentioning that comes out today comes out on the streaming stations. And if I take a look at kids, again, my kids being in their 40s, but younger kids, or including my kids, they have flat screen TVs. They have high speed internet, but they don't have cable because they don't care about television and they don't care about news.
No, that's a fact. One of the problems with news is that the current news presentations are very isolating to a lot of people. They're just so cliched, so boring, so predictable, and just so dated in its style. I mean, this is 2024, and again, just like radio, you see TV stations, particularly news, programming it like it was 1975 or 1980. And again, it's a new era.
Look, I can tell you that, and you know this to be true, but if anybody out there travels, so you stop at a hotel, say it's a Wyndham, off the highway in Charlotte, North Carolina, or for that matter, it could be pick any state or pick any province. What you're going to see if you get in there and you watch local news is you're going to see a screen, a backdrop. You're going to see two anchors, usually a male and a female, not always, but mostly. And they're going to tell you the news. Then somebody's going to tell you the sports. Somebody's going to stand up and point to what's called a green screen. It's going to look like they're pointing to a map that shows the weather. And you're going to find that wherever you go. And that's the way it's been for 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, it's like there's a government regulation controlling what the news programming should look like. I mean, I was a Tribune company, which owned a lot of television stations. And, the TV guys are just locked into their own world. They just don't see outside of what they know and what they've learned. And that's a real problem. There's just traditional journalists who do excellent work at journalism, but are terrible at programming. So
if I were, say, NBC or ABC, you've worked for ABC before in their radio area, but say you were brought in and asked what had to be done to revitalize television. We have dropping audience numbers. We have the resulting poor revenues. I'm coming to you for help. What would you say to me?
Well, I think it's a matter of the willingness to really blow it up and start over again, and just audit your station from A to Z, midnight to midnight, and really find out what the vulnerabilities are and what the strengths are, and really reinvent the station, and also have a strong digital presence, because that's where it's going. But for right now, they need to just blow up the old playbook and start over. It can be very exciting, very powerful, But again,
And they're
nobody's.
going to say it's going to be very expensive.
Well, yeah, but it's there are actually ways to cut costs because I think we're entering an era where the importance of the anchor is becoming less and less relevant. And sadly, just like the disc jockey, I mean, there aren't a lot of great radio personalities around anymore. But I think the whole, as you said, two anchors chit-chatting in front of a fake city skyline with the weather guy standing up over here and the sports guy on hold. That's just so tired. I mean, it's the Simpsons make fun of it. It's a parody of itself.
They do.
And again, there are great journalists out there, but the presentation is just killing it. And again,
You're
you get
just
the
reminding me of there was a cartoon show that I used to do voiceovers. I think you did too. And there was a cartoon show I was hired to do voices for the characters. You never saw me and I wasn't identified, but it was me and I had to put on a big voice like that. And it turned out the main character I was playing was a newscaster behind a desk. That's what it is. It's parody.
yeah, it's the newsman behind the news person behind the desk hasn't changed in 70 years. I have pictures of early 50s television. It's the same thing. It's just a lot slicker now, but it's guys behind the desk with either a globe or a fake city skyline in the background.
True. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about special events like the Olympics. They get audience because it's the Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
But that can be done on other channels besides the mainstream networks or the one that pays the money. It can be done on streaming channels. Even the mainstream networks have streaming channels, and they do carry Olympics on it, but just as easily there as on a broadcast transmitter received by a cable that some people don't have. So is the same true of regular newscasts? Or in other words, can they be done on streaming, and can they be done in a different way? Or have they become just plain, as you seem to be saying, they're stale, or they're just fancy repeaters for what newsmakers want to say? I mean, newsmakers hand out the news, it's rewritten somewhere in a radio station or in a network newsroom, and out it comes. The idea of actually going out and doing journalism, I don't know if that exists in television anymore.
No,
maybe 60 minutes.
It should, but it doesn't always. Again, you'll find Fox fans arguing that Fox is journalism. CNN fans will say that's journalism. But again, it gets back to the way it's packaged, the presentation of it. I have a 3 words: eye, ear, brain, where I think it's got to be visually stunning. Right now, what you see is a reporter standing in front of a factory that burned down 12 hours ago. Get away from that and just beautiful pictures, incredible cinematic presentation. Then there's ear, where every story should have a soundtrack. Right now, if you close your eyes and listen to TV news, it's all old school percussive, dun 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 tonight at 10. It just very cool about 50 years ago. It doesn't work anymore. But the point is that it needs eye, ear, and brain. This is we have a thing called an intellectual scale, where television, if 1 is some really bad reality show and 10 is masterpiece theater, most news programming is in the 4 to 5 range, where it's kind of dumbed down. Where I think the golden opportunity is in that 7 range, where it's not elite, it's not a 10, but it's just not stupid. It's not a 5 or a 3, but that 7, that intellectual position, is real important. And I don't think people look at intellectual positioning. They're so focused on demographics. But you should look at the different intellects. When I was, again, at a newspaper company, there was one paper in particular which just totally misread their intellectual position. They thought they were the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They weren't. They were a local paper, and they should be talking about local sports and local events. And, they didn't. And, if they understood this market's target sweet spot intellectually, they'd probably still be having a good circulation. But they just misread it. And you see that a lot, even in radio. There's an intellectual scale where, if you take a sophisticated rock station and give them top 40 DJs, that would screw it up. So you got a intellectual positioning, I think, is something that's going to emerge over the next few years.
So if I'm I'm going to pull the strings tight now and wrap it up, because I think we've gone through it. If I'm a broadcast executive, or at least in a business that wants to address people who spend money, and from what you said, just talked about newspapers, we've been through television and radio. It sounds to me that I have a lot to think about if I want to be here in 10 years or maybe even in 5.
Yeah, but again, I think it's an exciting time for people with new ideas. You still have to break the code with the companies and the people that have the money to do it, but the opportunities are there. And I think over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of those materialize in all media, not only television and radio. But I look at it as a very exciting time.
Well, I'm planning to be around for it.
Good.
I'm not finished yet.
Me too.
Speculating on what the media landscape might look like and reminiscing about what it used to be. It's been interesting, Lee. Thanks so much for spending some time here today on the Sherman Report.
No problem. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, Lee Abrams.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Fred Hahn. Fred Hahn, a union leader with the Ontario-based Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE. I met him years ago when he led and I fought a strike by York University teaching staff that went on for weeks. I pushed a then Ontario Liberal government, and they ultimately introduced legislation to force the resumption of work by the strikers at York. In short, we saved the year for 50,000 students, but we'd have lost if Fred Hahn had had it his way. That's how I met Fred Hahn. Fred rose through the ranks in CUPE, and we encountered each other when he turned up to make deputations to the Finance Committee, which I sat on as a legislator at budget time, and frequently in other legislative settings. And I'll say this, Fred fights like hell for what he believes in, but he and I don't share beliefs very often. It seems that Fred may have overstepped the line. Currently, Fred Hahn is finding himself on a hot seat. It seems he reposted a little video on social media a week or two back. It shows an Olympic diver with a Star of David on his arm, I guess a tattoo, going off a high diving board. The diver morphs into a bomb, which explodes on contact with the water, which has morphed by then into the Gazan landscape. So the viewer sees the aftermath of what? An airstrike. The union doesn't like it. Jewish members of the union really don't like it. And Jews in general are not appreciative of Hahn's worldview. The result is CUPE seeking Fred Hahn's resignation, and I agree with that request. Hahn has removed the video. He's apologized. As recently as yesterday, this issue attracted the attention of Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who spoke publicly calling Fred a disgusting human being. That's a quote. Fred had explained his actions this way, and now I'm quoting Fred Hahn. My intention in posting it was to call attention to the reality that while the Russian Federation was barred from participating in the Paris Olympics, the state of Israel was permitted to participate, which appeared clearly to me to be a double standard. My intent was never to associate Jewish people with the violence enacted by the state of Israel. It remains my strongly held view that it is a terrible mistake to conflate abhorrent actions by the state of Israel with Jewish humanity or identity. End of quote. Well, Fred, here's what I have to say. Good for CUPE for requesting your resignation, Fred Hahn. If Fred refuses, they should find a way to fire him. And Fred, you need some schooling. Jewish people don't concern themselves with conflation of Jews and Israel. For the vast majority of Jews, Israel is part of their reality. In fact, you skewered yourself by taking a diver wearing a Star of David and conflating yourself, what he was doing, diving, with Israel or war in the Middle East, which Israel never even initiated. You've demonstrated selective hatred, Fred, whether you think you have or not. So do the honorable thing. Even CUPE appears to be done with you. So just go away. That's it for the Sherman Report for today. Enjoy your evening. Remember, we're on live at 5 p.m. daily with the video version posted to YouTube and generally available on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. If you look me up on those, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn by name, Peter Sherman, you'll generally find the video. If a podcast is more to your liking, we post the audio-only version to all podcast platforms. See you tomorrow right here on the Sherman Report.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to the Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.